Hello, and welcome to this roundtable discussion on Catholic education. My name is Mary Pat Donahue, your host for this roundtable and the Executive Director of the Secretariat of Catholic Education here at the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. I would like to introduce each of our guests today. First, let me welcome our current chairman of the Committee on Catholic Education, Bishop Thomas Daly of Spokane. Welcome, Bishop Daly.
Thank you, Mary Pat.
We are also blessed to be joined by Bishop James Conley of Lincoln, Nebraska, a strong supporter of Catholic education. Welcome to you, Bishop.
Good to be here. Thank you.
And we're rounding out our panel today with Elizabeth Sullivan, currently the Executive Director of the Institute for Catholic Liberal Education. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thanks for having me, Mary Pat.
We are delighted to have this opportunity to come together and discuss both the opportunities and the challenges that are facing Catholic education today. You know, Bishop Daly, I'll just start with you. How do you see the current state of Catholic education in America?
On the positive side, because of COVID, a group of parents who either took for granted and dismissed or really weren't aware of how important Catholic education is in the lives of their children. The fact that Catholic schools made a concerted effort to be in person, while the public schools and perhaps other school systems kept having Zoom conferences and distance learning, the Catholic schools came out very strongly as to why we need to be in person. So in one sense, that's been a very positive thing. Of course, there's always the challenges we face, still financial, the cost of Catholic education, areas where our schools seem to have, because of population shifts, the demographics have changed. That, of course, is one of concerns. But in general, I think we have emerged with a very solid program that is student-based, but not students as individuals so much as a community. And that, again, has, as parents have looked and they realize they need help in this area, and as schools honestly have gone down a path of political correctness, wokeism, and other areas, the Catholic schools that have remained faithful treat the child, the family, as beloved sons and daughters of God and as created in His image and likeness. And that, combined with the success of students when they move on into high school and then to college, all of these are very important signs of the attention to students and their families, teaching not just academics, but not helping students to be just literate, but to be educated. And then the commitment to passing on the faith. All of that makes us and helps us to be in a very strong position. So for that, that's the good news.
Now, do you want me to give you the bad news?
Point,
No.
counterpoint, right?
I would just underline what Bishop Daly said. I think one of the things that, and I would agree 100% with all those points, I think one of the things that challenges Catholic schools today is how quickly our culture has really moved in a very secular way. You know, there was a common language, even in the public schools 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, that we all kind of shared. But they become so politicized, and the different issues that the secular culture is dealing with have worked their way into the schools, all the way down to the lowest level. And we are not immune from that in the Catholic schools, because I think we have to remember that most of our Catholic teachers are trained and formed in educational schools and universities that are secular. I mean, we have very few Catholic higher education schools that train in especially master's levels for degrees in education administration and teaching. So even our good Catholics are kind of indoctrinated with this, and it's hard to kind of sift through this. That's what they learn, and that's the air they breathe. And in addition to that, you know, the public school approach to education has always been very pragmatic and utilitarian. So we really have two very different ways of looking at the human person. And so it's easy for our schools to sort of drift to this sort of utilitarian aspect, that schools are meant to train students to get into the best colleges, then to get the best jobs. Very pragmatic, very worldly. And then we have a crucifix on the wall, or we have, some statues here, but it's just sort of Catholic appearing, but not deeply Catholic. And that's where I think the anthropology, the Christian anthropology, like Bishop Daly said, that our goal, the end of education, is to help children become holy, but also happy and filled with the joy of the Lord, and the love of learning, and to be steeped in that truth and goodness and beauty that goes back to the very beginning of schools, which was the Catholic Church was very much involved in the very beginning of education, period, for Western culture. So I think that we have a lot of forces at work against this understanding. But the good news, again, there is lots of good news, is the pandemic brought this out, but I think even before the pandemic, parents and educators were saying, well, looking at, around us in education and how everything was sort of plummeting with regard to government schools compared to Europe and different places like that. What are we doing wrong? What's wrong with our schools? And I think that there's been the rediscovery, certainly among Catholics, but also I think non-Catholics, our brothers and sisters of different faith traditions, that there is this rich heritage of beauty and truth and goodness that people want their children to learn. And so you see new schools springing up, and you see new schools reforming their curriculum because they're saying we have this rich treasury, and we're not even tapping into it. We're sort of following the trends of where everything's going in society. And so I think that's a great sign that parents and educators are saying, wait, there's got to be something more to education.
It certainly does have a grassroots feel to it, for sure, which kind of brings us into the very wheelhouse of the Institute for Catholic Liberal Education. So, Beth, can you share your perspective from the ICLE?
Yes, I think this cultural moment, as these bishops describe, is a great opportunity for us, because I think parents who might otherwise not have dialed into the fact that secular education is not neutral have seen it loud and clear. And many Catholic educators have not realized, they are discovering now that we've been cut off from our own rich educational tradition that Bishop Conley describes. Now that it's being recovered, and really has been being recovered since, I would say, the 90s at a grassroots level, starting with homeschoolers and then people who founded independent schools seeking a liberal arts approach, stepping back from the secular model. In 2010, as you know, the first parish diocesan school tried to adopt this model, St. Jerome Academy here in Hyattsville up the street. And that just unleashed great interest among schools and educators, because once they see this, they see that it's really freeing for the teacher and for the child. It is a liberal education. So we see that it's spreading at our conference across the way. It's our largest gathering ever. We have 350 educators and another nearly 1,000 people live streaming. So there's a great deal of interest. I think it's about reviving those vocations.
It's interesting as you're talking too, because all of us seated at this table have in one way or another been involved with the transformation of a school, or the reimagining of schools in light of the church's tradition. And I think it's important for us to consider that. Sometimes this transformation goes by a shorthand of classical, but in fact, what we're really talking about is, as Bishop Conley said, reaching right into the church's treasury to bring forward again in this modern time what the church believes about Catholic education. And I know from my perspective at St. Jerome Academy, it was critically important that the teachers deeply understand this philosophy first and foremost. And so that was one thing that I took away, was the need to stop. We don't like to do this in the modern world, but to stop and really allow ourselves to be immersed in a way of thinking that's consistent with the church. And so I'll just ask you each to reflect on some of the schools that you've worked with. I know Bishop Daly, you could speak to St. Charles, for example.
St. Charles School in Spokane is one of the older schools still within Spokane, and it was a parish where 2 parishes were eventually in the 60s carved off. And the school at one time was a double school, and it has a number of alumni that are still involved in their parishes. But it had seen better times. And in the time I came as bishop 7 years ago to Spokane, I saw the enrollment drop despite the efforts that were done. I signed another pastor in to the parish, and with the principal, who herself had background in the classical kind of model, I decided after looking at another school that let's try it at St. Charles. And the pastor, Father Soler, working with Heather, the principal, he himself had been trained, originally he's from Argentina, trained in Europe, understood. So it was a bold endeavor for us, because in the people's minds, what are they trying to do? The bishop's trying to bring us back to this model that is not adequate. The students will be able to quote things that won't matter in this tech society in which we live. But in fact, a school that was going to open its doors with 60, in fact, probably not open its doors, is now approaching 170. And it's just not a matter of advertising and plugging in. It's a different way of educating. It's as you said, a reimagining, perhaps even a recapturing that all that is best. And it is a success story.
And then I have to ask about the school that I always have considered the sister school to St. Jerome's, because we were on similar tracks, and that's Our Lady of Lourdes in Denver.
Right. Yeah, that's another story very similar to Bishop Daly's story of St. Charles. But Our Lady of Lourdes was a parish in Denver when I was auxiliary bishop there before I came to Lincoln in 2012. So this is about 2010. And there was a typical in a lot of dioceses, and especially large ones like the Archdiocese of Denver, there were 3 schools within, let's say, a 3, 4, 5 mile area, and they were all declining. And so what to do? And I remember being at a senior staff meeting, and Archbishop Sheptu said, "Well, we just got to close Lourdes." And so I said, "Well, wait a second. Let's think about this a little more." And I had just met or known her a little bit in the young adult group. At the time she was single. She's married now. Rosemary Anderson, that was her name before. Mm-hmm. She was teaching middle school at St. James, which was another parish school in the archdiocese, and she was just very enthusiastic. The kids loved. I went and visited her class, and I could just tell she was a very dynamic teacher. She had no administration, no background in any kind of being a principal, but she had a love for learning, and she was always learning herself, and just had this enthusiasm. And so at one of these meetings, I was bold, and I said, "Archbishop, I met this teacher that would be really great at Lourdes. Let's give it a shot for a year and see what happens." And he was very skeptical, and he said, "Okay, just 1 year. We'll just see, because we really have to take care of this situation." And so she came in, and the first year there was this buzz, because who is this young teacher? And she had all this enthusiasm. And then parents began to inquire about the school. And so the first year it stayed level. It dropped below 100 students, and that's where they said if it goes below 100, we really can't sustain it. Well, it stayed the first year stayed right around 100. The next year they got 25 new students, and it just kept doubling each year, 50. So much so that 5 years ago they had to open a second campus, which is part of the Lourdes family. And it's been a tremendous success story, and there's been parents that have just raved about how their children come home differently. They come home talking about what they've learned, joy, they come home with lots of ideas, and there's just this buzz. And Rosemary has hired mostly younger teachers that are fresh out of college, didn't have much budget, so you don't have to pay them as much because they're just getting started. But it's that youth and enthusiasm that has revived Lourdes and continues to grow. And I know that now in the Archdiocese of Denver, many other schools are kind of following suit.
Yeah, they were a spark,
Yeah.
for sure. And speaking of sparks, I can't ask Beth to name just one school, because ICLE has done this with orders of hundreds at this point in time. But my curiosity is something I mentioned briefly, but I'd like to ask you to expound on this a little bit more. The moniker classical that is often used, and we've used it ourselves. It's a little bit of a marketing shorthand in some ways, but it's not entirely accurate to describe these schools, St. Charles, St. Jerome's, and Our Lady of Lourdes. So could you give us some insight into
Sure.
how we should be thinking about this?
Sure. Early on, that word classical was latched onto to distinguish a different educational plan, a different approach to education. As this movement has matured, it's become quite obvious that there's a difference, right? Classical speaks to the philosophical origins of the tradition. Catholic liberal education speaks to its end, which is freedom in Christ. This is the aim of all Catholic schools, right? This is all what we're trying to do. And we haven't recognized, I think, the degree to which the secular model of education, which is very fragmented and very ordered toward college and career, actually undermines the faith of children. So we need to be careful about using those approaches. It's not that we want to throw everything out, but we want to be discerning about what we use that does nurture the soul and to begin to show the unity of all things in Christ.
It's a great thing about being Catholic. The church has always taken up into herself what is good.
Yes.
And I think, and that's the dynamism in this. It certainly isn't, to your point, Bishop, the concern that, or maybe it was Bishop Daly who said this, the concern that, oh, this is going to be stale and old or what have you. Not at all. It really is an intellectual adventure that continually brings up into itself what is good and true and beautiful.
I would only add one thing to Elizabeth's, because we've talked about this a lot. When people see the word classical, the C word as we call it, first of all they think, well, this must be an elite, sort of privileged for the wealthy or for the gifted. And of course, St. Jerome shatters that.
Totally shatters
in a
that.
minority neighborhood.
Yep.
And so it's completely false. And then secondly, educators tend to be very defensive because they know they haven't had a classical background. So that means that I got to go back to school, I got to start over. I've been teaching for 25 years and that wasn't right, that wasn't good. No, I went to public schools my whole life until I stepped in the seminary and had a horrible education. And I discovered this later on. And nobody's got a classical education.
Nope.
It's gone,
I certainly didn't.
But we use the word classical in the sense of the rich tradition of the past. So I think if we can dispel those myths about what that means, then people are less intimidated. It is very inclusive, it's very normal, natural, and it's really geared to the human person.
So you used a word inclusive that is going to bring me to my next point. We have had a very interesting and very good Supreme Court season in this past year. We had a large education case, as you are well aware, Bishop Daly, who commented on the Carson case, which recognizes the right of Catholic schools to be fully and deeply and truly Catholic and available to parents who seek them when the state has some type of school choice program. And we know that that's going to benefit many of our schools, just the fact that the court has helped us to think differently. But of course, the larger and more long-lasting case is the Dobbs case, which overturned Roe versus Wade. And while that is the case that affirms the dignity of life, it has impacts for Catholic education. And I think it's important for us in Catholic education to think about what our post-Dobbs schools should look like. So I'll just throw this out, in terms of being inclusive of children with different needs, families with different structures, and I just invite you to comment.
Sure. I think the criticism made of the Catholic Church is the Church only cares about the unborn baby during the 9 months of pregnancy, and once the baby's born, the Church jumps on the bandwagon that poor mom or dad, if the dad's a part of it, and the baby are a burden to society. And that's not the case at all. The Church, I think, makes it clear whatever Walking with Mothers sometimes might be the program. It's called Preparers in the West. It's with a mom and, again, hopefully a dad's in the picture, but many times not, during the 9 months of pregnancy, with mentor moms helping, assisting, formula, I guess when they can get formula now, the diapers and babysitting trips to doctor's appointments, up to 5 years of that child's life. So I think with that decision, it falls upon the Church. No one's going to tell this reality and this truth unless we do it ourselves. And of course, with Catholic schools, during Respect Life Month, there are opportunities for the parish school, in addition to the parish as a whole and to Catholic high schools, to help strengthen a culture of life. There is a loss of sense of, again, self-respect. If we look at the violence, many times the shootings, drug use, and overall, I said, all of that becomes symptomatic of a culture that doesn't value life. And if we can work with families and young people and explain it, we're meant for the truth. And, the truth will set us free. as Jesus speaks about. So we have this, just as this is an important opportunity in the post-pandemic to see the value of Catholic education, in the post-Dobbs world, we have to show a culture why life is sacred. And we can do that.
Yep.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. I was thinking as Bishop was talking about it, one of the things that abortion really kind of, the message that abortion sends is that, we solve our problems through violence. Mm-hmm. And whether you believe in abortion or not, it's a violent act on a woman, even if she wants it and consents to it. And so that's the kind of mode we're in, that we have problems and we use violence to try to solve those problems. The shootings, people who are ill, mentally ill, or whatever, drugs, we're solving our problems in a way that is not healthy. And I think we've done a pretty good job in Catholic schools in through science and all of the different new technologies of getting that window into the wall or into the womb, that young children can see the development of the child from the very beginning. And science is really on our side for that. And I know in our Catholic schools, and I'm sure it's true across the country, that idea that the tiny child in the womb is a baby, is a real baby. That's been great, and I think a lot of young people know that. But then the idea that, we need to wrap our arms around both of them, the mother and the child. And then, like Bishop Daly said, we have always been very, very much involved in caring for the poor, the indigent, our social services, our hospitals, all of these Catholic hospitals, tradition. We have a great, preferential option for the poor, and especially those who don't have the means to take care of themselves. So in this post-Dobbs thing, I think what we really have to emphasize now is that we need to love these women who find themselves in crisis pregnancies. And that means we need to cast out the safety net, we need to put resources there, the government needs to put resources there, and these women who are in crisis situations, they have to know that they're not alone. And then we can pick them up, and the stigma is not so bad anymore. We can care for them, and like Bishop Daly said, 5 years I think is really, we should commit and say any woman who's pregnant and doesn't have any means, we will take care of you for 5 years after you have your baby. And that's just charity. That's just love of Christ for the poor and for those who are in difficult situations. So I think we have a wonderful opportunity to really teach our children charity and the love of neighbor and the corporal works of mercy. Amen. And to really reach out to both of them.
Yeah, and as with everything in Catholic schools, it starts with the teacher. So Beth, the Institute has a new Catholic teacher credential program. So maybe you could reflect a little bit on how that program may help with just this exact area in the post-Dobbs pro-life world we find ourselves in.
Yes, well, as we were saying, to demonstrate that love of neighbor, the woman, the mother, the child, we can demonstrate an understanding of the human person. We can also learn about the understanding of the human person at many levels, right? This begins in a child's earliest years, the Christian understanding of the human person. In order to do that, we need teachers who are formed in the philosophy and the theology of the dignity of the human person. What we are seeing, what we are hearing from bishops and superintendents is that it's so difficult to find well-formed teachers because most of us have not had the blessing of this formation. So we saw a gap that we stepped in to meet. So Archbishop Aquila in the Archdiocese of Denver last year asked us to design, we had done work in the schools and he was very happy with it. So he asked us to design a credential program that would be a deeply Catholic alternative to state teacher licensure. And we did that, and we've run the pilot program. We go to Denver once a month. It's 18 months long. It's about 140 hours or so. And working with this cohort of teachers, we've built this program that has been meaningful to them. They're trying to restore wonder in the classroom, to have a very integrated approach to their teaching and to the content. And so we've just launched now the national cohort. It's a combination hybrid and online learning, and that will gather 3 times a year at Aquinas College in Nashville.
Wonderful.
The sisters, the Nashville Dominican sisters, will be hosting us there.
Wonderful.
So we hope this program will spread. For large dioceses, we can bring it there. And we have quite a number of dioceses who are already recognizing it, where they have the freedom from the state to do that.
Sure. Thank you all, my panelists here. It was a wonderful conversation. And thank you for joining us. And please be assured of our prayers for all of you as you begin this next school year. God bless.
Thank you, Mary Pat.
Thank you, Mary Pat.
Thank you, Mary Pat.